Heads up, this video includes story spoilers for Metroid Dread, though if you clicked on this, it's probably because you already know them. Video game villains, they're pretty popular. What good is a hero without someone for them to defeat? And sometimes it's fun acting out the role of the bad guy. So much that a couple in particular had a lot of Smash support for a very long time until they finally made it in. And Nintendo in particular has a whole rogues gallery of memorable antagonists. Just look at them. But do you notice how many of them have been around for a very long time? They established themselves early on in their series' history, and it makes it very difficult for any new bad guys to match them. But sometimes, a new big bad hits just the right notes to break through that evil glass ceiling. Whether a comical figure as entertaining as they are fun to beat, or a tragic and morally gray figure who players pity as they strike them down, or someone who manages to be a legitimate threat and a serious final challenge. This is Challenger Approaching, where we take a character who isn't playable in Smash yet and go deep into detail on what they could be like if they got in for real. Our challenger this time is a new villain on the block who became very popular very quickly. Could his rise to prominence have come at the right time to follow his nemesis into Smash as well? Raven Beak. Ashkar Behek, a name that translates to our language as Ravenbeak, is the leader of one faction of the Chozo people and the ultimate villain of Metroid Dread, but his influence on the setting and story runs far deeper than that. His tribe, the Malkin, were one of two that first colonized the planet SR-388. Upon discovering the existence of the all-consuming X-parasites, the Chozo stationed there engineered the creation of the Metroids to keep the parasites in check. When members of the other tribe, the Thoha, grew worried that the Metroids and their energy-draining abilities might themselves be weaponized, Ravenbeak and his soldiers made their move, slaughtering all but one of the Thoha so no one could oppose his plans. Oh, and he was one of two Chozo who donated their DNA to an orphan Samus so she could survive on the planet Zebes, making him a surrogate father of sorts. Ravenbeak's actions, in full view and behind the scenes, constantly influenced the events of Metroid Dread. He leaked footage of an X-parasite to lure Samus to the remote planet ZDR, formerly a Malkin stronghold before an X-outbreak ravaged them. He overpowered one of the Emmy survey robots first sent to the planet, then hacked the programming of the remaining Emmy so they'd seek out and forcibly extract the Metroid DNA Samus was given during the events of Metroid Fusion. And when a skirmish soon after she landed started awakening actual Metroid powers, Ravenbeak quickly changed his plans, convincingly impersonating Samus's ship's AI, one that operates in a language that isn't his native tongue, to manipulate her into developing her new abilities further. His plan now? To capture her at her strongest and clone her into an unstoppable army with which to conquer the galaxy. All of this comes to a head in one hell of a final boss fight, cementing Ravenbeak as not only one of Samus's greatest foes, but an iconic villain in his own right. His carefully laid out plans, his ability to improvise when circumstances change, and his ability to pull everyone's strings behind the scenes so they do exactly what he wants makes him much more than a cliché evil overlord. And his direct ties to Samus's backstory make him basically the Metroid version of Darth Vader, so it's no surprise that he's become a popular request to get into the next Smash Bros. Game. However, the invite isn't necessarily his to take. Ravenbeak may be his series frontrunner right now, but there's another title in the pipeline. Metroid Prime 4 will get here eventually, and when it does, Sylux will come to the forefront again. Barring the unlikely, though not impossible, odds of Smash 6 having room for two Metroid newcomers, these antagonists and their support bases will be pitted against each other. But timing may be on Ravenbeak's side. The longer it takes for Prime 4 to be ready, and the sooner development on Smash 6 begins, if it hasn't already behind closed doors, the less likely Ravenbeak would have any competition, just the way he would want. So what if everything went his way? What would Ravenbeak be like in Smash? His basic design can be a mostly direct lift from Metroid Dread. Being so recent has its benefits. He'd keep his imposing silver and gray Chozo battle armor, complete with blood red cape and a pair of tassels that display his motto prominently. While Ravenbeak's design doesn't need altering, his size and proportions probably would. I know too big is a meme, but considering he's literally twice as big as Samus normally, we want him to be more than just a walking punching bag barely able to interact with platforms or avoid hazards. Shrinking him down to the size of Bowser or Ganondorf would accomplish this, along with fiddling with his body proportions a little like they did with Bayonetta. Don't want his head to look freakishly small, or his arms and legs to be thin as sticks. But you know what would stay as is? Ravenbeak's personality. Ruthless, cunning, and highly pragmatic, his movements, animations, and voice work should come off as someone driven to crush all opposition. He's also not the type to revel in it any more than necessary. Unlike Ridley's sadistic streak, DDD's gloating, or K. Rool's instability, dominating his opponents is simply a means to an end of gaining more power. But there'd still be some moments where the facade cracks, like shouting indignantly during a star KO, or the inherent silliness of using a bunny hood or super spicy curry. For his alts, Ravenbeak could pull from a few different places. Borrowing palettes from Samus's different armor upgrades is one option. Her suit is of Chozo origin, and sporting a dark counterpart to that would be fitting. The X-infected Chozo soldiers in Metroid Dread are another source. Could get red or gold palettes from there. We could even plug a color scheme or two from the Emmy, as they too became part of his grand scheme. Create a couple original palettes to round out the set, and we have something acceptable. Now for attributes, stats, and fighting style, and the latter was surprisingly difficult to nail down. What I settled on was something very dynamic and dependent on the situation, to an extent. We'll get into exactly how later, but for now, let's say the more of a certain resource he has available, the more he bends the flow of battle to his will. A running trend though, when he's at full power, Ravenbeak is very strong against enemy zoners, with means to contest foes who use ranged attacks, bypass attempts to wall him out, or completely ignore all but the strongest projectiles. Anyone who relies on controlling the space around them must beware. Doesn't help as much against fighters who don't need a zone of control, but it's there. On to exact stats, and despite the size down, Ravenbeak is still one of the biggest characters in the game, and his height and high-tech sci-fi armor combine to make him the 5th heaviest of the current roster. Add in his stellar recovery, and he'd be very difficult to bring down for good. How fitting. I bet those mobility stats have you kinda confused. With a mediocre dash, subpar airspeed, floaty fall speed, and running speed in the bottom 10, you might be thinking, how is someone this slow supposed to be good against zoners? Don't worry, it'll make sense later. Ravenbeak has tools that help him work around his mobility issues, and his air movement is better than advertised. Not only do his jumps go above average distance, he unfurls a pair of jet black wings to perform his mid-air jumps, as in plural, because he's able to jump twice in mid-air for 3 total, and unlike most fighters with multiple mid-air jumps, his are not pitifully short. And when Ravenbeak has his prey in his clutches, you see those attack stats. While most of his kit isn't very fast, he has good range overall, high damage output, and several moves are both strong and reliable finishers. He can turn the tides in an instant if someone overextends or drops their guard. But he does need to keep the pressure on. His combos aren't the greatest, so he relies more on keeping the advantage and never letting his foes get comfortable. But enough details, let's get to the part that matters. Ravenbeak's basic attacks start him on the right foot, talon. His jab combo is based on the 3-hit chain he does in his boss fight. Swipes outward with his left hand, then slashes downward with it, then pivots and performs a bigger downward slash. Not the fastest jab out there, but it has a lot of reach, does legit damage, and Ravenbeak shifts forward during the last hit, if there's room to, making it even harder to escape. While he fires his arm cannon's hyper beams several times in his fight, Ravenbeak can also infuse parts of his armor with the beam's energy to strengthen them. He does this for his forward tilt, focusing hyper energy into his arm cannon and performing a rising horizontal swing. It's an effective spacing tool, but unlike in the footage here, no actual beam comes out. It's just a melee attack, almost like he's having trouble fully tapping into it. Ravenbeak's up tilt has him do an axe kick with one leg that, looks an awful lot like the one Samus does. Must be a bit of Chozo martial arts that she learned while under their care, and Ravenbeak uses it too. It's similar to hers, with a more pronounced animation, longer yet thinner hitboxes, and the ability to spike. For his down tilt, Ravenbeak swings his arm cannon across the ground to catch anyone standing in front of him. Not only is it faster than it sounds, it pops people up for combos, and its low knockback growth means it can do that for a surprisingly long time. Then his dash attack is exactly what you'd guess. The dash punch he uses in the intro and his boss fight is too important not to include. Has a bit of startup, but it goes a long distance, giving him a burst option that belies his slow base mobility. It's also as strong as it looks, being a legitimate kill move. Now for Ravenbeak's smash attacks. He definitely doesn't hold back here, especially not with his forward smash, charging his arm cannon and firing a shotgun-like hyper beam blast. Still can't seem to use its full strength, but what he gets here still has range on par with the Belmont's forward smashes with impressive power. The one problem? It's very slow. Ravenbeak's up smash pulls from a certain move in his boss fight, pointing his arm cannon upward and dealing a ray-like spread of hyper energy that deals multiple hits above him before a stronger finisher. Unlike in Dread, it's only a fan shape instead of a near circle because duh, but it's still a powerful anti-air that doubles as his fastest smash attack. Then Ravenbeak's down smash has him raise both arms up, gathering hyper energy into them. Then he swings them down and unleashes a pair of bright red shockwaves to both sides. The waves are much smaller than in his fight and don't go nearly as far, about 2/3 of his total size, traveling 2/3 of a dash length. But its power is more than worth it, though fighters with very low crouches can duck under the shockwaves. He may not be a typical bird, but Ravenbeak's aerials are still a key part of his kit. His neutral air is a bit unusual, infusing his arm cannon with hyper energy and swinging it downward in front of him, then upward behind him. Kind of like Ike Snare animation-wise, but with two parts and more immediate force in the swings. Kinda slow and unreliable out of shield, but it clears space and edge guards very well. Ravenbeak's forward air has him power up his arm cannon and fire 2 circular shots in a rising arc, reminiscent of Samus's version, but with the opposite direction and with different details. 2 variants of one Chozo combat technique. Fewer hits, but bigger hitboxes and greater power, and just as much end lag. Ravenbeak's back air has him spin around and throw a powerful kick behind him. Wait a minute, it's another one Samus also learned. Just like its counterpart, this move is even stronger than it looks and is one of Ravenbeak's best kill moves. Like with his up tilt, his version is longer but thinner. His up air is kinda like his forward air, but Ravenbeak varies the type of fire, swinging his arm cannon up and backward while firing a volley of 3 circular shots. Each hit is smaller and weaker than his forward air, but the move overall is more active, one more hit, and this makes it very good at juggling. Why can't he seem to get this suit working like he used to? Then Ravenbeak's down air is an obvious pick, using the diving kick from his second phase. You know how these stall and fall moves go, slow to come out and punishable if he lands without hitting someone, but if he does mix someone up, it's a strong hit that can even kill off the side. Even works as a risky edgeguard as long as you start it high enough up. Now for his grab game, and Ravenbeak doesn't mess around. His grab animations have him reach forward with his left hand, average frame data for a heavy and surprising reach on his dash and pivot grabs. But if he gets his hand on someone, he lifts them up off the ground by the neck, if they have one, to show them how powerless they really are. From there, his pummel has him bash them with his arm cannon while they're helpless to resist. Ravenbeak's throws don't let up. His forward throw has him lower his opponent back down while he charges and fires a shot from his arm cannon at point blank. This one's his kill throw, rewarding players for actively cornering people. His back throw tosses the opponent behind him, strongly, without bothering to look back. They're not worth the trouble. His up throw tosses the opponent upward with one hand. It's his only throw to deal single-digit damage, but that's because it's a combo starter, leading into one of a few different aerials. And his down throw lowers the opponent and his arm cannon, then fires a strange dark orb from it that immediately collides with them. Less knockback than his forward throw, but at a lower angle that can set up edge guards. Finally, what about taunts? If Ravenbeak feels like gloating, some options include taking a triumphant stance and uttering his motto, beckoning his opponent to fight him directly, just like he does to Samus in the first phase of his fight, and one where he gathers hyper energy around his outstretched palm, then crushes it, demonstrating what happens to anyone who defies him. Ravenbeak's specials are a force to be reckoned with, but there's a trick to them we need to cover first. Remember that thing about him having certain moves tied to a resource? Well, if you've played the recent Metroid games, you probably knew what it was. Moving around allows Ravenbeak's armor to draw energy out of his surroundings and convert it to a power source of Chozo design called Aeon. Once his Aeon gauge is filled, he can use it to activate his specials, aside from his up special, where it's optional. I know needing a full gauge to use a special sounds crippling, but the gauge replenishes quickly from movement alone, and even standing still fills it slowly, though suffering knockback doesn't. And since his specials don't always use the entire gauge at once, refilling it is easier than you'd think, though after he uses a special, he can't gain more Aeon for a couple seconds. It creates an interesting setup. Ravenbeak's not very mobile, but he wants to move around to keep his Aeon topped off. Luckily, he gains a lot from using it. But how? Well, first is his neutral special, and we haven't had any true projectiles yet. Let's change that with an Aeon skill that makes up for it fast. Beam Burst is one of the Aeon abilities Samus gains in Metroid Samus Returns, cranking her shot speed into overdrive to vaporize enemies in the blink of an eye, and Ravenbeak just so happens to use it in the second phase of his boss fight. On use, Ravenbeak takes aim, charges his arm cannon with Aeon energy, and fires a volley of energy shots at rapid speed. The longer you hold, the more Aeon you expend, but the more damage you deal, and it racks up fast. And the greater max distance the shots gain. But that's not all. You can use the control stick to freely aim during this, able to adjust at will to track opponents or cover certain angles. Once you finish firing, from letting go or running out of Aeon, Ravenbeak looses one final stronger shot to finish the combo. Beam Burst deals a heavy burst of damage. We're talking over 30%. That also controls a line of space, pressuring enemies or giving you breathing room. But the hitboxes on the shots are thin, deal minimal knockback, and the final shot only sends people far enough away to get them out of your face. Completely unable to kill, it's for utility first and foremost. Using this move immediately expends 1/3 of the Aeon gauge, and from there it slowly drains more the longer you hold. Alright, that's one skill down. What about Ravenbeak's side special? Well, if you've played Metroid Dread, you might have guessed this one. Another Aeon power Samus gains that Ravenbeak uses in his fight, Flash Shift lets the user zip forward a distance at lightning speed. Now imagine what that could do. On use, Ravenbeak suddenly warps a dash-and-a-half length directly ahead, and unlike Samus's version, he phases through any fighters, obstacles, or projectiles in his path. You can act surprisingly quickly afterward, able to go into an attack, a jump, or another action. But you're not limited to just one dash. If you press B a second time, Ravenbeak shifts twice in a row, going even further with the second dash than the first, and traveling long distances in, well, a flash. A cornerstone of his kit, Flash Shift is Ravenbeak's best answer to the zoners that usually cripple slow big bodies. This lets you go right through projectiles and immediately threaten their source if you're lined up with them and react quickly, making you very difficult to wall out. You can even shift out of shield to bail out of pressure without needing a fast aerial. That is, if you have enough Aeon to use it. Remember, need a full gauge or it won't activate. The first shift uses half of the gauge, while the second shift uses the rest. It's a powerful tool with a high opportunity cost. We're going to improvise a little for the up special. This move doesn't use any Aeon in his boss fight, but who says he couldn't enhance it with it? A certain attack he uses in his second phase works as a recovery move, and we can build on it from there. On use, Ravenbeak pauses briefly and charges up, his wings crackling with energy. Then he launches forward in a spiraling dive in whichever direction you choose, damaging anyone in the way in his path back to the stage. Goes a pretty good distance on its own, but the hitbox isn't the biggest, and its knockback is pretty middling, normally. Holding B at the start has Ravenbeak channel Aeon into his wings, powering them further until they glow a bright gold. While it gives the move more startup, the resulting dive is faster, the hitbox is bigger and stronger, and Ravenbeak gains partial armor during the dive that lets him shrug off weak attacks. Aeon Dive is a recovery move with an optional boost that makes it tougher to contest. Between this, 2 mid-air jumps, and Flash Shift for horizontal distance, Ravenbeak's recovery is as impressive as you'd expect from an alien bird thing. The Aeon-powered version can also work as a kill move, albeit a very telegraphed one, and it expends less than half of his gauge. Though Ravenbeak is vulnerable during the move's startup, give yourself breathing room before using it. That's 3, but what about his down special? Flash Shift already makes him an effective zone breaker, but with one more tool, we can really put him over the top. Another power from Samus returns. Lightning armor diverts damage away from the wielder for a time, aka that thing Ravenbeak has active for the entire first phase of his fight. If his gauge is completely filled, which is pretty often, pressing down and B has Ravenbeak activate the armor, cloaking himself in an electric barrier. As long as the armor is active, any damage he takes is cut in half, and he gains a type of super armor like Yoshi's double jump has that subtracts damage and hit stun from any enemy attack. Everything is less of a threat in this state, and he can shrug off weaker moves like they're nothing while still being able to attack. But there's a catch. The Aeon gauge slowly empties while the armor is up. Every hit you take depletes it more relative to the damage taken. You cannot cancel out early and save the remaining gauge, and you cannot use other specials while the armor is up, except the up special, but only the unpowered version, and it burns your entire gauge immediately. Where Flash Shift helps Ravenbeak get in from far away, Lightning Armor makes him a terrifying presence at medium range and demands opponents respect him, or else. It's another way he can temporarily work around typical heavy weaknesses, though since it doesn't augment his stats, and losing access to his neutral and side specials means no ranged attack or burst movement, he's vulnerable to keep away strats in this state. Only one thing left, Ravenbeak's final smash. What could go here for... Wait, he can't fully control his powers, he has a stronger grudge than before, then that could only mean... Oh no. Brought back from the dead somehow, by Master Hand or otherwise, Ravenbeak taps into the Smash Ball's power and unleashes something he's held back the entire time, floating into the background and erupting into an X-Parasite abomination formed from all the creatures the parasite that got him at the end of Dread previously absorbed. But now he's in control, as the creature looms in the background and opens its maw, revealing Ravenbeak's head glaring toward the stage, and a targeting reticle appears. You only have one shot, so aim carefully and press any button, or wait enough time, and the maw snaps down on the spot in the blink of an eye, dealing immense damage to anyone it catches. And if they're at 100% or greater afterward, they're destroyed in an instant. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. This is how Ravenbeak could work in Smash. A warlord from a people thought vanished, whose actions indirectly led to every trial and tragedy Samus has been forced to endure. Now personally entering the fight, his aim is simple. Use whatever means necessary, be they weapons, ploys, or otherwise, to bend the galaxy to his will. With high damage output and strong, reliable finishers, Ravenbeak can wipe out his foes in just a few interactions while hardly breaking a sweat. Do Chozo sweat? A surprisingly versatile kit lets him adapt his tactics on the fly and exploit enemies where they're most vulnerable, and his specials let him dominate all who stand in his way while also circumventing several weak points normally common to super heavies. However, his huge size and poor base mobility force Ravenbeak to be very careful in neutral and disadvantaged states. Since most of his attacks are slow, he's limited in what moves he can throw out when, and making him vulnerable to being baited and punished. And his means of bypassing the above weaknesses are limited to temporary workarounds that can only be replenished by using his poor base mobility. So I kinda took a risk with this one lore-wise, playing off the idea that Ravenbeak might have somehow survived getting vaporized, took full control over the X that assimilated him like Quiet Robe did, but in a damaged form that can't use his old abilities to their fullest and can't absorb other creatures, is a reach, but think of the potential, pitting Samus, who is now the last Metroid, against Ravenbeak, now the last of the X, a species the Metroids were originally created to stop. Maybe it could even help explain him suddenly being smaller in Smash? I did look into a few other design ideas, mulled over making his up special a Shine Spark, even though I already gave that to Samus for her moveset remake, but I found something else that also works. It also took me a while to settle on his exact playstyle, decided to downplay his ranged arsenal, like Samus' Smash moveset does, in favor of encouraging being as cunning, manipulative, and legitimately threatening as he is in Dread. Notice how all of his specials focus on something other than sheer power? They're all a means to an end in a way that is very in character. This guy's really picked up support, so hopefully I did him justice, or else I just disappointed a lot of people. Been wanting to take a crack at a Smash design for him for a while, and I figured it was only a matter of time. Maybe we'll see some other rising stars from recent Nintendo titles in upcoming episodes too? Special thanks for this video to these people here. Thanks in particular to my patrons for your continued support. And now, any patrons have the opportunity to vote on which of these 3 characters gets featured next episode. This one might not be much of a contest. So, until next time, see you next mission.